I'm 67 years old. Spent 43 years as a full-time minister of music. 48 years as a minister of music, counting part-time churches in college and seminary. I began being a minister of music at age 19. Ministry, for the most part, has been fairly steady, but I've had some incredibly high mountaintop experiences, and I've had some valleys through the way. I'm going to be retiring from full-time church music ministry in 19 days. But I'm not done. I can hardly wait to see what God has for me in my future. Let me show you my family. This is my bunch. Actually was taken last Christmas in South Carolina as we were at a Christmas Eve service at our church. Now this is where we are and where I am now. But let me tell you how I got here. Everyone's got a story. Here's mine. I had great parents. That's me. Wasn't I cute? That's my older sister, and I'm actually very fortunate to be here today and having survived my older sister, but that's another story. You don't get to choose your parents, but if I had gotten to choose my parents, I would have chosen these two people. We were a middle-class family, actually sort of edging toward the lower part of middle class. My mom was a nurse, but when the kids started coming along, she became a stay-at-home mom. My dad worked with the Civil Corps of Engineers, building bridges and dams and those kind of projects. He was a blue-collar kind of guy. I guess at least one of his claims to fame is, if you're familiar with the Colonial Golf Course in Fort Worth, he helped redesign that with Ben Hogan, the incredibly famous golfer of old. We moved around a lot because of my dad's job. My sister was born in Alabama. I was born in Texas. My younger brother, who was not quite here yet at this time, was born in Oklahoma. My parents grew up staunch Methodists. We moved to Fort Worth when I was 5 years old, across the street from Sagamore Hill Baptist Church. Now keep in mind we were staunch, I don't mean every once in a while, I mean staunch Methodists. But there was a really close Methodist church, and Sagamore Hill was having Vacation Bible School. And my sister was about 9, I was about 5, so we went to Vacation Bible School, and we just loved it. And we talked to our folks, that's where we want to go to church. And so, sure enough, they began to visit too. They loved it too, and soon joined Sagamore Hill Baptist Church. Not long after that, at age 6, I accepted Christ. I just remember coming back from a Sunday night service at church. And I went to bed, and I don't know what was said, but my heart had been touched. And I just knew I needed Jesus in my life. My dad was still up in the living room, and I went and sat in his lap and talked to him about this. We went and talked to Brother Swank the next day, and that's when I accepted Christ as my personal Savior. I remember walking down the aisle at Sagamore Hill. It was a pretty big church. And when I got down the aisle, Brother Swank decided, I guess, that people really couldn't see I was there, so I remember picking me up and putting me on top of the Lord's Supper table. So people could see the little guy who had given his life to Christ that day. There's Sagamore Hill Baptist Church. A little bit of a fuzzy picture, that's the best one I could find, but lived across the street from that church. My call to ministry. I moved to Louisville, Texas in about 2nd grade. It was a dynamic community, population 1,500, way out in the middle of nowhere before all the boom took place. Enjoyed our time there. My dad was on a project there that built the dam that formed Lake Louisville now. Moved back to Fort Worth in the middle of the 6th grade, and that's where I had probably what I would have to consider my most embarrassing moment. I went by the name of Chucky throughout my childhood. I know it's a little difficult to imagine now, but I was skinny. I don't mean slim. One time when I was about second grade, my sister looked at me and said, "Chucky, you don't have any muscles." And that hurt just a little bit, but then I looked in the mirror and there was really no visual evidence to dispute her claim. I mean, I was, you know, that skinny arms and legs and just a skinny guy. Well, it's not, like I said, 6th grade now, and I was going to my new school. It was the middle of the semester, and so my parents took me to the school and then met with the principal, and the principal took me into my classroom. The teacher was Harold S. Miles, an older fellow, but a really good teacher. But I didn't know him, I didn't know anybody, not only in my class, I didn't know anybody in my whole school. But here I was, the new student, and you know how sort of intimidating that is anyway. But anyway, the principal gave Mr. Miles my card, and so and he left. Mr. Miles says, "Students, I want to introduce you to our new student. It's Charles Bridwell." And so I tapped Mr. Miles on the shoulder, and I motioned him. I said, "I want to be called Chucky." And he sort of looked down at me, and he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, students, he wants to be called Chubby." Well, here I was, probably weighed 60 pounds, and wanted to be called Chubby. You can imagine the classroom enjoyed that moment, much more than I did. At any rate, we bought a house when we came back to Fort Worth, on the other side of Sagamore Hill Baptist Church, just because we had loved that church so much. And my parents wanted to make sure that we could go to church easily. We were there literally every time the doors were open, and sometimes when the doors weren't even open. There was a new young music director at Sagamore Hill by the name of Gerald Ray. He was in seminary and was a music director at Sagamore. And I was in his first ever children's choir that he ever had in the 6th grade. I remember the first song we ever sang was "Who Is on the Lord's Side." You probably don't even know that song. It's an old hymn. But I still remember learning that from Gerald. Then in the 7th grade the next year, I was in his youth choir. I have a recollection about that time, maybe around 7th grade, that we had a retreat. And we had a campfire time at the retreat. And so we were standing around singing choruses, I suppose, around the campfire. And Gerald, I was standing next to Gerald. He looked over at me and says, "You have a really nice tenor voice." And that was such an encouragement to me. The truth was, I didn't have a tenor voice. I was a voice soprano, just singing as low as I could, trying to find something down there that might match something, a melody or a harmony. But I was incredibly encouraged by that, just one little statement. About a year later, I went to Glorietta with one of my cousins. It wasn't Music Week, but some week, training union week or something. And there was a gentleman there who spoke about missions and gave an invitation at the end of anyone who wanted to make a decision for special service. That's what full-time Christian service, we call it special service. And I had a little bit of tugging in my heart that maybe that's what I ought to do, but I didn't go forward. And then after a lot of people had, then he had another invitation that said, now, if you may not want to be in full-time Christian service, but if you will, no matter what your profession is, that you will be totally committed to Christ and serve Him that way. And so I walked down the aisle because I wanted to be just like my dad, I wanted to be an engineer or an architect or something like that. I admired him so much. Well, getting home, I just knew that that's not what I should have done. So about 6 weeks later, we went to youth camp, Camp Sagamore. Camp Sagamore was actually Latham Springs, not too far from here. And I was about, I think, the summer after my 8th grade year. And at that time, an invitation was given to full-time Christian service. And I walked down the aisle, and I knew exactly that's what I should do. Now, I had a bit of a dilemma here, because I really didn't know what that might mean. I knew I didn't want to be a preacher, because I could not imagine standing up in front of a large crowd and talking to people for 30 minutes or 45 in some cases. I knew that I didn't want to be a missionary. I'm a little picky about my food, and I can't imagine spending my life eating African food or Chinese food. I mean, what would that be like? And so I knew I couldn't be a missionary because I, just tell me what I'd have to eat. Now, this is an 8th grader processing his call. I know I could be a minister of music for sure, because by that time my voice had started changing, and it was so incredibly, at that time it was just embarrassing. I would be, I said, well, maybe it's educational director, but I had no idea what those guys do. So I said, no, I don't. Okay. So I went down the list and I eliminated everything. But I did know that I was called to serve God. And so I just started pouring my life into the church. Over the next few years, Gerald Ray started giving me opportunities at the church. He was, by the way, minister of music and youth at Sagamore Hill at the time. And so I would, living across the street from the church, if I had didn't have something after school, then I would go over to the church and I would run the mimeograph machine. You don't even know what that is, or the folding machine, or I'd lick envelopes, or whatever I could do to help out. He asked me to work in children's choirs, and at that time there were 3 junior choirs, which was 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. There was a 4th grade on Tuesday, 5th grade on Wednesday, and 6th grade on Thursday, right after school, about 4 o'clock. So I helped with those choirs. He asked me to lead the music during Youth Week. I guess sensed a little something there. I was editor of the youth paper, the Chatterbox. He even asked me to, when I was a senior in high school, to sing in the adult choir. Wow, what an honor that was. But I knew by that time exactly what God was calling me to do. God was calling me to be a minister of music. Randall has indicated a little bit of this too, but my education, undergraduate at Oklahoma Baptist University. I have an incredibly soft spot in my heart for that wonderful institution, and I love Baylor and all about Baylor. But those 4 years at Oklahoma Baptist University were incredible. During that time, Oklahoma Baptist University was known for producing ministers of music. And I could go into a whole lot of detail about what got me there and that sort of thing. But the bottom line is, God led me to that place, and I'm certainly glad He did. Then to Southwestern Seminary, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, my hometown. But I lived in the dormitory there and loved my time. I tell you, an incredibly strong music faculty, church music faculty at Southwestern at the time. And I could go down the list and tell you about each one, but that was such a blessing in my life. While I was in college, actually, I served in 2 churches, Crest Baptist Church in Oklahoma City and Calvary Baptist Church in Lindsay, Oklahoma, for about 18 months each, while I was in seminary at Westside Baptist Church in Fort Worth for about 2.5 years. Let me tell you about my full-time churches, and once again, then talked about just a little bit. But 4 churches in 43 years, and each in a different state. Never thought that would happen. Didn't see that one coming, as they say. My first church out of seminary was First Baptist Church, Paducah, Kentucky, for 2 years. Then I was at Trinity Baptist Church in Oklahoma City for 6 years. University Baptist Church in Coral Gables, Florida, which is Miami, for 24 years. And now at Columbus Avenue Baptist Church here in Waco for 11 years. Let me share with you about my family. First about how I met my wife, Debbie. Sort of interesting. You see, she was at Sagamore Hill Baptist Church as a kid too. Now, I know she doesn't look like it, but she's a bit younger than I am. That's what I believe I know. Actually, 4 years. So when we were in this large youth group at Sagamore Hill, it was a very large youth group. We used to take around 400, 450 to youth camp from that one church. And so I was in senior high when she was in junior high. And so you just didn't pay much attention to each other. But maybe, I sort of remember seeing her maybe during that time. But here I was, a big high school guy, and she was this little junior high girl. Now, I came back from college to seminary in Fort Worth, and I dropped by the old stomping ground, Sagamore Hill, and one Sunday night. And a bunch of us were outside talking after the service. And I looked over, and I saw in a bright red Mustang, over on the passenger side, the most gorgeous girl I had ever laid my eyes on. Seriously. And I leaned over to someone, I said, "Who is the blonde in the Mustang?" They said, "Well, it's Debbie Blackwell." By the way, she is Debbie Blackwell Bridwell, but Debbie Blackwell. I said, "Oh my, she has grown up." Well, now, there was another issue. In the driver's side of the Mustang was Tommy Joe. Tommy Joe Robbins was a very nice-looking guy. He was a basketball player at TCU. He had incredible black hair, ducktails, and a spit curl to die for. I actually myself had attempted a spit curl at one point. I don't know if you've ever seen the old TV show Laverne and Shirley, but I looked a little more like Swiggy than Elvis. But anyway, through a series of events, well, actually, later on that summer, Camp Sagamore, once again, they invited smaller churches to come along sometimes. So I brought my little Westside Baptist Church youth group. There were about 30 or 40 of us. And I had one older guy there, about freshman in college. And anyway, he found a girl there that he started dating from Sagamore. And a couple weeks later, he said, "Hey, do you want a double date?" I said, "Double date? A double date? Who would I have a date with?" He said, "Well, my girlfriend's best friend is Debbie Blackwell." I said, "Yes." Well, from there on, sort of the rest is history. About a year and a half later, we married, and about the time I finished seminary, we headed off for our first church in Paducah, Kentucky. So we've been married now 43 years. I've been in full-time ministry 43 years. We had our wedding about a week before I started my first church. Now, here are our two daughters when they were little. That's Jennifer and Melinda. They were 21 months apart. And here they are as adults now. Both went to Samford University in Birmingham. Both sang in the a cappella choir there. Although they were not music majors, they received their degrees in education. Both met Deep South guys. And both now are involved in ministry as adults. And it's just a blessing to see your gals grow up in a minister's home and still want to be a minister. That's not always the case. Actually, one of the highlights of my life is they both asked me to perform their wedding ceremonies. which I did, which was by far harder than any other project I've ever tried to accomplish. Just being a part of that and being a part of your daughter's wedding. I haven't got time to tell you about that, but it was an amazing time. Actually, my first wedding I ever did, this is sort of weird, my first wedding I ever did as a minister was my dad's wedding. Sounds a little weird, doesn't it? But my mom passed away in her early 60s, and I got a call from my dad a couple years later, and he said, "Son, I got a favor to ask you." I said, "What's that, Dad? Anything you need?" He says, "Would you perform my wedding?" I said, "What?" I didn't even know he was dating. I didn't have none of that to go along. So, but anyway, we had a wonderful wedding. We married a fabulous gal, and my mom and dad were married for 38 years, and my dad and my stepmom were married 23 years. And I had great experience with that. But that was a little bit interesting. Now, my daughters are not perfect. They're pretty close. But my grandkids are perfect. All 6 of them. We have the best time. I have 3 grandsons, 3 granddaughters, ages 2 to 13. They call us Grammy and Gramps, or sometimes Grampsy. We have the best time. One of the guys over on this side, we were going. One of the things that we do when we all get together are, I might have been South Carolina with just those 3, but they love to go with me to the dollar store. And so we'll load up and go to the dollar store, and then I'll say, "Okay, you can get 2 things." So they go in there and they pick out some candy and a little toy and this time. Well, we've done this before, but anyway, we were getting ready this time to go to the dollar store, and we stopped, parked. I said, "Okay, now before we go in, there are some rules." And he said, "I know the rules." I said, "Okay, what are the rules?" He said, "Don't yell, don't run, and don't shake your booty." I said, "Well, okay." That'll work. That'll work. Another side, the little guy in front there, that's little Carson. This is just the last Christmas. We were in my daughter's house, and I walked through the hallway and stopped, and there was a beautiful nativity set, and Carson was standing beside it. But the nativity set, all the figures were sort of falling over and laying on top of each other, and just in total disarray. And I looked at Carson, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "They were wrestling." Okay. I said, "Well, let's set them back up. What do you say?" So we set them back up and kept going. We have a good time. It's very enjoyable to have these little kids. Hey, more about them later. But also, over a 7-year period, we had 7 foster children as well. There were 3 African American, 2 Hispanic, 2 Anglo. Some we had as little as just a few weeks. Others we had almost a year and a half. And I'd love to tell you about each one, but we don't have time. But I will just say that is one of the best things that we ever did as a family. And those foster kids taught us a lot. Let me tell you about some heroes and mentors in my life. Now, you students will not know most of these names, maybe none of these names. But let me share these with you. First, my mom. She gave me a musical ear, and she gave me a lot of encouragement. Some of my great memories as a kid, she used to play piano pretty much by ear, and it's sort of like ragtime gospel hymns. And it would just be all over the place, and just loved to play hymns. I also have a memory of her at the kitchen sink. Now, we didn't have a dishwasher. A lot of people didn't have a dishwasher at the time, but she would be washing dishes, and she would sing the old hymns, both soprano and alto at the same time, which is pretty good. She would sing the soprano line, and then she'd do a little alto echo to follow, and I just remember listening to those great old hymns with my mom singing. I remember coming home as a freshman from college, and I was a little bit discouraged. I loved the school, but I told my mom, I said, See, I don't, and I'm telling you now, I don't have a great solo singing voice. Never have. You know, I know a lot about voice and all that kind of stuff, and I teach choir and all that, but as a soloist, I'm really not. And some of my friends who had never had a lesson just sang, just had a gift, and oh my gosh, they could sing. And so I was sort of discouraged, and I said, and my mom said, well, what's up? And I told her that, and she said, you know, that may be God's way of telling you that He's wanting you to use a lot of other people, not depend on yourself to always be in front of people, but to use a lot of other people. And you know, that meant a lot to me at that time. And that's honestly what I've done. I get a lot more joy of seeing people on stage, God using them in gifted ways, and me being down front or not even in the light, and just being able to maybe wave my arms a little bit and share in that way. My dad was totally non-musical. I don't know if you know the organization for men called Promise Keepers. Well, I'm just saying, way long before there was an organization, my dad was a promise keeper. He's that kind of guy. He modeled for me a calm spirit, patience. He modeled for me integrity. Such an important hero in my life. I don't have a picture here of Mrs. Collier, but Mrs. Collier was my piano teacher. I started taking piano in 9th grade, right after, actually my mom encouraged me to do that, and I told you she was my encourager. She said, no matter what you end up doing, whether you're a missionary or a pastor or whatever, if you can play the piano, that will come in good in your ministry. So that makes sense. So I started taking piano when all the rest of my friends were quitting piano about that. But Mrs. Collier was brilliant the way she treated a guy in my position. And the thing that I really appreciated, she insisted that I learn music theory. And every piano lesson, I had a lot of music theory as well, in addition to that, to the point where when I went to OBU as a freshman, I was able to earn a composition and arranging scholarship for 4 years at that school, primarily because what Mrs. Collier did for me. Now, I sang in the youth choirs and all of that, but that's where I was able to learn those kinds of skills. This is Gerald Ray, the minister of music I was telling you about. He was the best man in my wedding. And looking at this picture, I actually remember him as taller. Because I always looked up to him all the time. But he's my father in the music ministry. He modeled for me how to be a minister of music. This is Warren Angel. He was the dean of the School of Music at Oklahoma Baptist University, and just an incredible individual. He could play the piano just like no one else you've ever heard in just pop music, improvised music, did a lot of arranging and composition. But what I learned from Dean Angel was enthusiasm and confidence. He made me feel like I was the best student that he had ever had. But you know what? All of my buddies felt the same way. He made them feel that very same way too. But the joy and enthusiasm of his work with us made a lasting impression. T.W. Hunt was a professor at Southwestern Seminary when I was there. I could almost line up 6 or 8 guys in this category, but I picked Dr. Hunt. He taught music. He was a fine organist, but he's a musicologist and just a brilliant mind. But what impressed me about him was the deep, deep spiritual nature that he had about him, and how he led in a humble spirit and had a spiritual depth that was so contagious. And I love T.W. Hunt. Gene Bartlett was the head of the church music department for Oklahoma for many, many years. He led the music at Falls Creek Assembly. I don't know if you know about Falls Creek up in Oklahoma, but B.B. McKinney had been the music director there. for all these years. He was tragically killed in the early 50s in a car wreck, and Gene Bartlett took over for him and led music for several decades there. Uncle Gene, he was sort of like the Oklahoma musical god for us. Now, I went to OBU, so I just knew him at Falls Creek, and I was just in awe of this guy. And then interestingly enough, when I came back to Oklahoma City to interview for the job at Trinity Baptist Church, and I was coming in for my trial choir practice. And you know, you talk to the committee, then they invite you to come and lead the choir and see how you're doing from the choir. And I was like 26 years old, and just you know, that's sort of an interesting time. It's a lot bigger situation than I'd been in before. So I got up in front of the choir and I looked up, and who's sitting on the back row of the choir but Uncle Gene Bartlett. And I was just paralyzed inside. Now, I think I was moving otherwise, but I was so scared to death. Gene Bartlett was looking at me when I was trying to lead a choir practice. Well, somehow I made it through that choir practice. I have no idea how, but I did. At the end, he came walking down, and he has just an interesting way about him. He said, "Well, so I'm Gene Bartlett." I said, "Yes, sir, I know who you are." And he said, "You know what? I don't know whether we're going to call you here or not. And if we do, I don't even know if you'd be interested in coming. But if we call you and you decide to come, I want you to know that I'm going to be the best choir member you've ever had. And if you ever need anyone to help carry chairs or pass out books, you let me know, I'm your man." And I went, like that. And sure enough, God did call me there. And Gene was there practically every Wednesday night for the 6 years I was there. Not often there on Sundays because he was out leading music in other churches and visiting other churches. But basically what he taught me was humility and leadership. Yeah, he's a big guy, he's a big leader, but he has a humble spirit and a servant spirit as well. This guy, Jim Woodward, a fine choral conductor. He was a minister of music at First Baptist Tulsa, and went on to Oklahoma Baptist University after was on faculty, and after Dean Angel retired, then he became dean of the School of Music. Incredible musician and conductor, tragically killed in an airplane wreck. But he directed the Singing Churchmen of Oklahoma when I was a part of that. So a great influence on me chorally, and what Jim Woodward taught me was excellence in choral conducting and how to lead a choir with great excellence. I could go on and on about Bill Reynolds, Bob Burrows, Dan Yeary, a lot of people who have meant so much in my life. But we'll move on. I want to talk briefly about changes in church music. When I graduated from seminary, my task was clearly set before me. I basically had to choose hymns every Sunday and build up the choir. At that time, there weren't even handbells in Baptist churches. There were in Methodist and Presbyterians, but certainly not in Baptist churches. Orchestras were just almost unheard of, maybe one or two churches, but you didn't have orchestras. So it was pretty clear what you had to do. Then in the late 50s and 60s, rock and roll emerged and folk music became huge. Folk music, some of those guys were saved, and Jesus music was born. Then out of that, youth musicals, like the late 60s, Good News, the first one, youth musical, and none of you know that musical at all. But it was quite an innovation at that time. But interestingly enough, Good News came out of the Baptist Sunday School Board in Nashville, as it was called at the time, but not out of the music department, out of the church recreation department was the first youth musical, and then on from there. Contemporary Christian music was very controversial at the time, but was beginning to take hold in performance and then affecting the church as well. Simple choir cantatas that we were singing as young ministers of music then became, not because of the other, but just because they did, large pageants, large productions. church music changed in that way as well. Charismatic contemporary worship in Assemblies of God and other churches like that began influencing Protestant and Catholic worship as well. Praise teams and bands began replacing choirs in a lot of churches. It's been quite a ride watching all of this happen, and consider how all of these things affected my ministry and what we do now and how we are a part of this. Today the challenge is how to prepare to be a church music leader, talking to you and about you, in the present, and how to imagine what church music might be like in the future. And that's why God gave you, Randall Bradley, David Music, to answer all of those questions for you. Correct? That's the heart. And honestly, I cannot imagine it being in your place what you are facing as you are coming into the church music world, the challenges that you have before you. Yes, I had my challenges. But church music, I've had a good, strong inside view of how church music has changed through the years, and I love the opportunity to do that. Let me encourage you to take advantage also of networking with other music directors. Let me give you some of my networks. The first one was the Bison Glee Club, and that sounds like a sort of a funny name for a group, but that was the men's glee club, the Oklahoma Baptist University Bisons. That was our mascot. So we were the Bison Glee Club, and we were world famous, or at least we thought we were. And we enjoyed going all over and singing all over the place. It's just a great fraternity of guys, and many of these guys are still now my very best friends. Metro Music Conference is a conference of music ministers, mostly in larger churches. There are 3 divisions now. Metro 1 is for the mega churches. Metro 2 is for more of the Columbus Avenue-sized churches that run between 1,000 and 2,000. And then there's a Metro 3 that goes 500 to, well, actually, we just changed that from 350 to 1,000. And get together once a year, and churches with like interest, and talk about issues and etc. But it's an incredible networking thing for me. Some of my good best friends are in there as well. Baptist Church Music Conference, we refer to that. Actually, that's how Dr. Music and I got to know each other, through the Baptist Church Music Conference, and that's where I first met Randall as well, through Baptist Church Music Conference. But that combines local ministers of music, education folks in seminaries and colleges, and also denominational folks in state music organizations, as well as in Nashville. We come together once a year, and it's a wonderful organization, great networking. Also, the singing groups, you mentioned these as well, but I'm going to quickly. I've been strongly involved in Singing Churchmen of Oklahoma, Florida Baptist Singing Men of Texas now. And I'm loving once a month getting, in fact, I'm going this Thursday to Greenville, Texas, and we're getting ready to go on a mission trip to Ukraine in just about 3 or 4 weeks. Through Singing Men of Texas, we've been to Brazil, to China, to Czech Republic, to Austria, and Switzerland with the Florida Singing Men. Wonderful opportunities in that way. And Associational Music Directors. Now this doesn't sound quite as glamorous, but once a month, the guys here and gals here in Waco get together. We have lunch at Uncle Dan's at the back, around the big old round table back there, and just have the best time, and mainly for fellowship and encouragement. Occasionally we'll do projects. In fact, I just want to refer this Waco Community Hymn Sing came out of that little group around the round table at Uncle Dan's, and it's going to be an amazing thing. I'm sure most of you are probably singing in this. If you're not, you need to be here. It's this coming Sunday night at 7 o'clock. And our vision was just to put together age groups. That's why we've got David Crowder, and that's on the same program with Kurt Kaiser. And Melinda Doolittle on the same program with Steve Green. And David Hamilton coming from Nashville to conduct the event. It's going to be amazing. I'm pretty sure it's on your radar, but if not, get on there real quick. It's going to be great. That came out of this little round table every month at Uncle Dan's Barbecue. Well, let me spend the rest of the time sharing with you the top 10 things that I'm still learning. What I've learned is that being a minister of music isn't something that you learn when you finish seminary, and then you've got it set for the whole rest of your ministry. You keep on learning. I'm going to give you a sort of David Letterman 10 down the line, if that's okay. I'm going to do it even if it's not okay, but here we go. 10, longevity has wonderful benefits. As you know, I've been in Columbus for 11 years, but I was 24 years in Miami at my church there, and I saw families form before my very eyes. One of the very unique things, particularly in Miami, being there over 2 decades, is I had my last youth choir there, senior high choir. There were a bunch of kids in that choir that I visited in the hospital the day they were born. And not only that, I had some of their parents in my first youth choirs at that same church. And the only way you can do that is by staying somewhere a long time and by investing a long time. I saw people go through lots of events, weddings, funerals, divorce, birth of children, so forth. Amazing thing. Also, that family was able to love our family. Our girls were 4 1/2 and 3 when we went there, but they packed the church when my daughters were married a couple of decades later, and enjoy the birth of our first grandchildren as well. Your ministry is more important than your music. We musicians tend to be so involved in our music, making music, that you need to know that, yeah, music is great, but ministry is more important than that. A few years ago, I had an interesting week. A young couple came to visit me that week who wanted me to perform their wedding. During the same week, another young couple in the choir came to visit me because they were on the edge of divorce. Same week, a teenage boy came to visit me because his parents wanted him to. He had been in the drug scene. He was doing pretty good, but they wanted me to encourage him to get involved in the church and the youth group and the choir. Same week, I had a 12th grade girl, senior in high school, come to, and she was signed up to go on mission tour in about 3 or 4 months, but she was pregnant. And what do I do? What do I do? Now, I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story in all of these. I wish I could, but I don't have time. But the bottom line is this. Those were chances for me to minister to these people. Had nothing to do with music, but it had so much to do with their lives. What a privilege. Your spouse is more important than your church job. You do realize, don't you, that although sometimes it's tough being in ministry, it's sometimes much tougher being married to a minister. Debbie and I have been married for 43 years, as I mentioned. We not only love each other, we like each other a lot, and although we occasionally drive each other nuts, don't we, honey?
A little.
Yeah. and that's just part of living together for 43 years. But you know, we are very different in a lot of ways. But we have a common calling and a common knowledge of our commitment to our Lord Jesus Christ. That's what holds us together. Friday night is our date night. Date night is usually dinner and a movie. We love to travel a lot, and we do that as much as we can. We're both sports nuts. Now, she's not as much a sports nut as I am, but she loves sports, and so we go to practically everything that Baylor has to offer sport-wise. Football, men and women's basketball, baseball, softball, tennis. We haven't been to equestrian yet, but who knows? But we love doing that together. In fact, sometimes when I'm out of town or I can't go, Debbie goes to those sports as well. But we love that together. It's great to have your spouse as your best friend. But you know, sometimes you get in situations in church where your spouse seems like your only friend. Somebody that you can really trust and you can really process things with that you could do with no one else. Your children's time with you is short. When your children are growing up and in home, it seems like they're going to be around forever. And we rarely or ever missed any concert or sporting event or cheerleading event or or anything, award ceremony that our girls were involved in. So glad we did. One of the great choices that I made that I didn't have time to make was that for 8 years I coached my girls in softball at the Coral Gables Youth Center across the street from the church. It was a great time for me to show them how much I cared about them by spending that time. But also I got to know their friends as well, and we were able to maybe even invest in them a little bit. Do that. One of the things that became an issue when my girls became teenagers, well, the disconnect seemed to be happening just a little bit. So I thought, I need to do something to make sure that we stay connected. So when Jennifer was in the 9th grade and Melinda was in the 7th grade, I began having every week breakfast with them individually. For instance, I would have breakfast with Jennifer on Tuesday and then take her to school. And then I would have breakfast with Melinda on Thursday and take her to school. We didn't have deep philosophical talks all the time, but we were together. And this happened from that time until they both graduated from high school. Such an incredibly precious time. Now, sometimes we had really deep heart stuff going on, but often it was just time together. I'll never forget when Melinda, my younger, was a senior in high school, and she had auditioned and had become a part of the New World School of the Arts, which is the performing arts high school in Miami, and it was all the way downtown Miami. And but I would drive downtown every week. At that time we were going to lunch because she had to leave the house about 6 o'clock or 6:15 to make it to ride the public transportation down there. But it was testing time. It was sort of the end of semester, and we had a time where we would always meet. But anyway, I drove down there, and I knew her schedule was maybe a little bit different. So, anyway, our regular time, and I drove around the block 7 or 8 times, and I didn't see her. So I just drove back to the church, and I thinking, well, she, you know, it's probably a different schedule, maybe whatever. So about an hour later, I got a call, and it was Melinda. Daddy, where were you? I said, well, honey, I drove around and I never did see you. I thought maybe, you know, with the testing on, maybe you forgot. And she said, Daddy, I'll never forget my time with you. Your time with your kids is all too short. Just when you have kids, invest. Always take your day off and all your vacation. Now I'm half good at this. I don't always do so good at taking my day off. I'm a little bit better here in Waco than I was in Miami. Not totally good, but I'm really good at taking all my vacation. And I never leave a vacation day unspent. And you really need that as the refreshing, the replenishment it takes to get away, to do other things. As important as ministry is, and as much as you can invest in your church and all, you're no good if you burn yourself out and you're not able to fully invest everything that you have. So be careful to do that. Don't ignore your physical health. Now, I play in the NBA, the Noon Basketball Association. That was a group that I started when I came here 11 years ago. Now, mind me, I played the MBA, the Morning Basketball Association. I played full court basketball 4 days a week at noon. I do it for 3 reasons. Number 1, I need the exercise. Number 2, I love basketball. Number 3, I hate jogging. Now, I play mostly with guys in their 20s and 30s, but they keep up pretty well with me. And we just have a blast, and it's a great fellowship time, it's a good getaway time. But the bottom line is, I'm spending an hour a day, 4 days a week, exercising, running full court, and trying to keep in shape. If you're not exercising, I don't care if you're a student or you need to be exercising. That's very, very important. You also need to consider, well, let me put it this way. This is a student too, but as a minister of music, it's primarily a sedentary kind of a job, where you're sitting around a lot at a desk, or you're doing, but you're really not exercising a lot. So do that. Also, really have to work at my eating habits. I'm not, like I said, I'm sort of a picky eater, and the things that I pick to eat are not always the best thing for me. And so I have to try to limit that, and Debbie really helps me by giving me vitamins and something that I'm drinking now. Yeah. That's supposed to have big liquid vegetables and fruits. I don't know, but whatever she does, I take. But I need to be. If I ate everything I wanted to, I would not have been able to come through that door. Being in ministry does not ensure spiritual growth. The preparing for a worship service does not give you the kind of spiritual growth that you will need to sustain your life. I'm going to have to move on quickly here. Your pastor needs your trust and support. Being with a pastor is much like a marriage in that you must communicate and you must commit to one another. Never think that it could never happen to me. Some of my best friends are not in ministry anymore because either poor choices that they made, or circumstances they found themselves in, or a pastor saying, we need to move in another direction and you're not the person to take us there. Never think it could never happen to me. And when things get tough, remember your call. And things will get tough. There will be times that you think you'll be so tired, or you're stressed, or you're going through something, you wonder, is this all worth it? And I've been at that point a few times in my ministry. But you know what? I always was able to go back to that call that I knew that I had. In conclusion, one of my granddaughters, little Kaylee, when she was about 3 years old, her little brother was about to be born. Debbie and I went there to be with them. And Debbie's job was to pretty much do everything with my daughter, getting ready for the baby. My job was to take care of Kaylee. And so Kaylee and Gramps went to the zoo, and Kaylee and Gramps went to the movie. Every time Gramps had to run an errand to the grocery store, Kaylee and Gramps took off together, or to the drugstore, or whatever. Well, we just had, or watched TV together, just sit there and play little games together. So for that 3 or 4 day period when little Kate was being born and came home and all was well, and it came time for me to go on home, Debbie was going to stay on a little bit longer. And it came to the evening meal right before we were leaving, or I was leaving the next morning. And my son-in-law said, well, who wants to say the blessing? And Kaylee raised her hand and said, I do. And so we all bowed our heads, and I want you to know the prayer that was prayed was probably the most incredible, meaningful prayer that I've ever heard. I've heard a lot of evangelists, preachers, theologians. Kaylee said, Dear God, thanks for Gramps. Amen. Wow. Wasn't that a good one? Yeah, and I've been so blessed in my ministry. So blessed in so many ways. But I want to say in conclusion here, I want to say to God, simply like Kaylee, thanks God.